You know, the legal system used to be fundamentally about right and wrong. It used to be about people doing the right thing, even if it used to be sometimes about people not doing the right thing. It used to be about sins of omission. But it never used to be about people acting strangely. It never used to be about persecuting people for not conforming to the norm. But that is what our legal system is becoming, I fear. We now have laws that are being enforced selectively. Some of the grooming laws that were introduced in the year, I forget the exact year, but some of them were so vague in the scope of their interpretation that you could hypothetically prosecute two underage teenagers for hugging on a park bench. And of course a guidance note was specifically issued by the government saying, we don't expect this sort of thing to be prosecuted. Well, just a moment, if you're now making legislation and assuming that the legislation is only going to be enforced selectively, then what you're doing is you're taking jurisprudence, the theory of what is right and wrong in a law, and how laws should be interpreted in a right and wrong way, and you are taking that out of the hands of a judge who has had years of experience, who has been taught to weigh up the moral ins and outs and rights and wrongs, as well as understanding the entire codified system of law, and you're taking it out of his hands, and you are placing it into the hands of the CPS, and more now, not only the CPS, but also the police, because many of these laws are so difficult to keep that the vast majority of the people cannot keep them on a daily basis. Particularly CRB checks. And now I believe that in due course a law will come into effect that will basically require people to have CRB checks simply to take their friends' children to school. That's something that people are not going to be able to adhere to. That's something that people in their daily lives are not going to be able to put up with. And what's going to happen is that it's going to be selectively enforced. It's only going to be cases where it's some, dirty old man taking 4 kids where they decide to enforce this rule. And that's taking jurisprudence out of the court's hands and putting it into the CPS's hands and the police's hands when it comes to whether or not to make an arrest. And that's not right. The CPS is not supposed to make moral judgments, and deciding whether to prosecute or not is a moral judgment. The police are not supposed to make moral judgments, and deciding whether this one case out of the 30 or so cases of people doing the similar thing is the one that should be brought to the CPS's attention, the one you should detain someone for. And that's what our justice system is becoming. It's becoming law by opinion, law by consensus, law by the average Joe in the case of the CPS's average Joe and the average Joe enrolled in the police forces, opinion and prejudices and skepticisms, and that's just not right. Laws should be enforced. If you're going to draft a law, you should intend that it should be enforced in all situations. It should be applicable to any situation you can possibly envision. Drafting laws so that people can then make value judgments based on when they should and shouldn't be enforced. It's a very dangerous path to walk down, and I believe it will lead to many people's rights being abused. It will lead to many people doing things that are considered odd or bizarre, but things that are not wrong, being persecuted because they are odd or bizarre, not because they're doing anything wrong. We have a fine tradition in this country of eccentricity and people bucking trends and being abnormal in many glorious ways. Some of our greatest geniuses have been virtually round the bend and certainly haven't behaved in normal ways. And yet we've celebrated them. Why is it now we want to take people who are eccentric and potentially make them targets for abuse of law? You know, it's a serious worry for me. And some other serious worries for me are the weakening of judicial process in general. I mean, I believe we've recently had the first, or are about to have the first trial where jury is actually not allowed, where they are not allowing a person to have a trial by jury. And okay, I have my great skepticism about the jury process, but to have a closed system, a system where the public doesn't get to say, hey, wait a minute, how do we know the government isn't abusing the law courts to push through personal agendas and political agendas under the guise of law? Well, how are you going to know? You aren't. It seems terribly dodgy. So it's things like this I'm worried about. I'm not worried about the economy of a recession. I know I have opinions on economics, I have opinions on industry, I have opinions on how to regenerate this country's industrial base. But what concerns me the most is that this is becoming a country where justice is not valued anymore. And I think that is what the government should be focusing on. It should not be focusing upon how can we, appease the people who are worried that their holiday is now not going to be in Benidorm, it's going to be in Bognor Regis, because the volcano's been erupting, and their company's been reducing their pay, and that's not the right way to think about the world. That's not the right way to deal with the world. And so just to give myself a few moments to form my thoughts. Yeah. I think that wraps it up in a pretty neat little packet, you know? I'm not saying that we don't need to prosecute people for doing things that are genuinely wrong. Oh, absolutely not. But what I'm saying is, let there be evidence that they've done something wrong, not just something weird. Let there be evidence that they meant to do it. Let it be objective, let it be hard, let it be persuasive. Let the courts rule not by opinion, let them rule by fact. And don't let the police and the CPS get to have the balance of say as to when someone has broken the law or not. You know, I think policemen who let people go because they think it's not a serious crime, because they think this is an exception to the rule, and the same with the CPS, I think it's abhorrent. And yet at the same time, I think some of the rules they're being asked to enforce are insane. And that's their response to some of these insane rules, because the country cannot operate on these rules 24 hours a day for every person. It's about compassion for our fellow man. It's about trying to rebuild broken situations instead of always trying to appease a public that wants blood, that wants someone to be held to account. And it's about ensuring that things are made fairer. It's about ensuring that cycles of violence and pain are not allowed to repeat. It's what our justice system should be for. So unless I think of something after I press this stop button, that's pretty much what I wanted to say.